following program is from NET, the Public Television Network.
Good evening. Jambo. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm Lou House, and this is Black Journal number 5. For the 4th straight week, the area of Brooklyn, which is called Ocean Hill-Brownsville, has been the center of a massive dispute among the United Federation of Teachers and the Community Governing Board representing Ocean Hill-Brownsville and the Board of Education. The dispute affects over 1 million children of the New York City school system, the largest school system in America, now closed by the 3rd teachers' strike of the term. In 1966, some parents and teachers proposed the forming of an independent school board governed by the community of Ocean Hill-Brownsville. The board wanted the authority to determine curriculum and who should teach in the schools which were far behind the others in the system. The teachers' union opposed the board, complaining that civil service procedures and job security were being violated. The New York Civil Liberties Union, in a report on the Ocean Hill controversy, stated, and I quote now, "It is crucial to set the record straight regarding the causes of the chaos in Ocean Hill and Brownsville. Our examination of the record has persuaded us that the chaos was not a result of local community control. On the contrary, we are persuaded that the chaos resulted from efforts to undermine local community control of the schools. Our research leads us to the following conclusions. 1, that from the beginning, the Central Board of Education attempted to scuttle the experiment in Ocean Hill-Brownsville by consistently refusing to define the authority of the local governing board. Number 2, that the United Federation of Teachers has used due process as a smokescreen to obscure its real goal, which is to discredit decentralization and sabotage community control. In the spring of 1968, the Ocean Hill-Brownsville Governing Board complained that some of the teachers tried to sabotage the operation and requested that the teachers be transferred out of the district. Superintendent of Schools Donovan ordered the teachers back, but the community did not allow them to enter the school.
On May 21st, before the strike began, Albert Schenker, president of the United Federation of Teachers, along with 500 teachers, went to the state legislature to lobby against a bill for massive school decentralization. Consequently, the bill was not passed. The UFT then stated that if the teachers were not returned, they would strike. Under police protection, the teachers were returned. Hundreds of police arrived in buses. They occupied the schoolyards, surrounded the neighborhood. Community people were forced to show identification upon entering the school area. UFT was still not happy. They claimed that union teachers were being harassed and threatened by the community and non-union teachers. The UFT then called another strike.
The teachers walked out. That is, those teachers who did not strike, those teachers who have been continually with the school. And what is becoming more and more apparent this morning is that it's an absolutely untenable situation.
The community refuses to accept the
absolutely,
dictates of the board.
and it's just not going to work unless something's done to get these teachers out of the community.
You have a centralized system, for example, that gives a test every year, year after year, to record the same degree of failure. In other words, the kid fails in the 3rd grade, he gets the test in the 4th grade, he fails it in the 4th grade, they give it to him in the 5th. Just completely reinforcing the failure, and this then defeats the youngster with no real, shall I say, processes of addressing themselves to this kind of academic retardation.
Tell me what number.
Ironically enough, Although the public schools of New York City are closed, the school that is the center of the dispute is still operating.
You're supposed to, in box number 2, Gail, in box number 2, not this one, in box number 2, circle the large number 2.
Here at the Ocean Hill-Brownsville School District, we have more than 9,000 students, 6,000 of whom are 2 to 3 years below level. It is our task to bring them up to par. It's interesting to note that at Junior High School 271, where there has been so much controversy, that the reading level in that school is 73% below minimum competence. In arithmetic, they are 84% below minimum competence. These are the things that we have to confront and to work with and to bring up to level.
There had been in this community a sense of apathy, a sense of rejection, lack of confidence. So when people began to first hear that this move was underfoot to control their schools, many people thought it was a joke. Many people thought that the white structure would still hold on to its control, that this could not be possible. And so when they held the election on August 4th, I think, there was approximately 1,200 people who came out and voted out of approximately 1,500 who had registered.
The teachers did not really relate to us, that is, most of them. We had a growing problem of what we would call inside destruction being done by teachers who did not approve of community control, who did not approve of decentralization, and they were doing everything they could to see it fail.
One, we have 75% of our teachers are white teachers. Two, we have the racial composition of this neighborhood is approximately 65% Afro-American and 30% Puerto Rican. We were able to raise the reading levels from 1 to 3 levels. In other words, we have had children who were on the reading readiness level and their successes were almost immediate.
The governing board and the community are being drawn closer and closer together in this conflict, closer together with the wider community in New York City and in this country. The parents of this community are being drawn closer together, and maybe for the first time, maybe in the history of education, we have such cooperation between parents and teachers and children. Stand with our children and don't forsake them in this hour. Our children must have an education in order to face the problems of the future. And the Board of Education is seeing to it that they do not have that education. We will not let this happen. This reminds me of Bull Connor, who in Birmingham, when the federal courts ruled that the parks should be open to all people so that black people could sit down in those parks, rather than follow that law, Bull Connor pulled up all the seats in the park so that no white people could sit down either. Shanker has done the very same thing in shutting up all the schools of the city, penalizing white people all over the city just to get at a few black people. This is racism. This is racism.
These children have a chance to learn and develop because they have teachers who believe they can. The parents have a new breath of air because of their interest and efforts, and improvement can be made in the educational system. And most of all, the society will benefit the use of these minds that have been freed from the chains of ignorance.
Last spring, IS 201 in East Harlem was a school in the headlines, the scene of daily protest and counter-protest over community control. Today, IS 201, focal point of New York City's first decentralization experiment, is peaceful. Students, teachers, and parents are working together to create an atmosphere of learning, attempting to counteract the legacy of neglect and educational deprivation which the black community has suffered at the hands of the educational establishment. By giving greater emphasis to black and Puerto Rican history and restructuring courses to relate directly to the specialized needs of Harlem's youth, IS 201 is proving that community control can be a sound educational concept. Its successes demonstrate that an aroused, concerned community working with teachers who care about children can take real and meaningful action to change a system which has miseducated and psychologically neglected our children for decades. And now here's People and Events in the News with William Greaves.
Black communities across the country are becoming more aware of the imbalance between black and white in the quality of health care. In Chicago, a group of doctors and other professionals formed the Council for Biomedical Careers, of which my colleague Lou House is director. This is a nonprofit educational agency to recruit, interest, and motivate more youngsters from low-income areas for pursuit of careers in health and science fields. A quick glance at one particular statistic shows that there is one white doctor for every 567 white persons. For blacks, it's one doctor for every 5,000 black persons. Dr. Arthur G. Falls, president of the CBMC, stated that to improve the situation, it will take recruitment, training, time and money, and imagination far beyond anything done so far. Next month, Black Journal will explore this subject to see just what steps are being taken to correct the imbalance in health care for blacks and other minorities. Black actors and actresses and film technicians are still shouting praises to actor Brock Peters, who, in his address at the Motion Picture Union's tribute to New York City's Mayor Lindsay, told it like it is. Peters was heckled by some of the unionists when he pointed out that despite the extremely large increase of feature films shot last summer in New York, less than 2.8% of the production crew members were non-white. Several of the unionists had to be restrained forcibly from physically advancing on the rostrum from which Peters spoke. The 19th Olympiad in Mexico continues in the wake of the expulsion of medal winners Tommy Smith and John Carlos from the United States team. The two sprinters were ordered from Olympic Village after making a show of support for Black Power during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Some athletes felt that the Olympic Committee, the American Olympic Committee, had overreacted to the sprinters' protest. The furor somewhat obscured the fantastic performances turned in by black athletes. In the men's track and field competition, black athletes have won 7 of the 12 gold medals captured by the United States. In women's track, the story has been the same, with black speedsters taking all 3 of the gold medals awarded to America. Blacks can also point with pride to the record-shattering performances turned in by the team from Kenya. The Kenyans captured 3 gold medals and clearly demonstrated that they are the greatest distance runners in the world. A poll taken by the United Auto Workers Union of 16,000 members at the Buick Works in Flint, Michigan. With more than 8,000 voting, 49% chose Mr. Wallace, 39% Vice President Humphrey, and 12% voted for Richard Nixon. The Michigan Chronicle wonders if the recent endorsement of Wallace by the Flint Local 326 is an indication of widespread pro-Wallace sentiment. Meanwhile, for the first time in the United Auto Workers' history, the UAW will not meet to endorse a presidential candidate despite the union president Walter Reuther's announced support of Humphrey. UAW claim that they don't have the money for such a convention. Just about 110 years ago, Black America gained its freedom, with hard decisions to make which involve voting rights for the black man and the election of forward-looking men to national office. Here, with a profile of the black vote, is Lou House.
On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered. The Civil War is over. The Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment became reality. They said blacks were free, free to learn, free to travel, presumably free to vote. Both the North and the South reacted. Between 1865 and 1868, 6 Northern legislators defeated proposals to extend the vote to freedmen. 8 Southern states enacted the Black Codes, which required every black male to be in the service of white men and carry an official certificate showing lawful residence and a job. Vagrancy penalties were imposed on any black person who could not support himself and on blacks found unlawfully assembling. In reaction to the Black Codes, Congress passed, over the veto of President Andrew Johnson, the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, which divided the former Confederate states into 5 military districts, ordered elections for constitutional conventions, and gave the vote to freedmen. Under the protection of federal troops, Southern blacks began to vote in 1867. We elected delegates to state constitutional conventions. We elected Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback, governor of Louisiana. we elected Blanche Kelson Bruce and Hiram Revels, United States Senators from Mississippi. We also elected state treasurers, secretaries of state, and superintendents of education in Mississippi, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. From 1867 to 1877, black men served in the legislatures of every southern state. In South Carolina, they had a majority in every session except one. A total of 20 black United States congressmen were elected between 1870 and 1901, but the reaction set in, and black people were driven from power by terror and fraud. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized black voters and their white supporters by violence, murder, and burnings. Voting booths were mysteriously moved on Election Day or guarded by masked riders. In the Compromise of 1877, a coalition of Northern Republicans and Southern whites awarded Rutherford Hayes the disputed electoral votes that gave him the presidency in exchange for the promise of the removal of federal troops and the return of Southern governments to the forces of reaction in the South. The return of these white governments brought the poll tax, Jim Crow laws, the grandfather clause, and the white primaries. Near the end of his second term, George H. White of North Carolina rose in Congress to bid his farewell. This, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the Negro's temporary farewell to the American Congress. But let me say, Phoenix-like, he will rise up someday and come again. These parting words are on behalf of an outraged, heartbroken, bruised and bleeding, but God-fearing people. Faithful, industrious, loyal, rising people, full of potential force and power.
The wave of the future. It may be a symbolic nomination tonight, but it may not be symbolic 4 years hence. We offer a nomination with the greatest pleasure, the name of Julian Bond.
Julian Bond has emerged dramatically onto the national scene at the Democratic Convention. He became the first black man to be nominated for vice president and led his insurgent delegation to a stunning victory over the forces of Governor Maddox. Julian Bond, a 28-year-old state legislator from Atlanta, is a central figure in the movement to reform American society. Unlike his former SNCC co-workers Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, Bond has chosen to work within the political establishment. We asked him why.
Well, first, because I can see two things. First, I know that being in the legislature in Georgia, and I'm just going to be a second-term man this time, I'm not about by myself or even with the help of the other black legislators going to revolutionize Georgia. If I thought I was, or if I told my constituents I was, I'd be kidding them, I'd be kidding myself. The other thing I know is that I can, and I have, been of service to the people who sent me there. I've done things for them.
Bond's role is broader than state legislator. He has been thrust into national politics now and must meet an incredibly rigorous speaking schedule all across the country. Here in New York, he'll appear with senatorial candidate Paul O'Dwyer.
Monday in Boston, Tuesday in Boston, Wednesday in Philadelphia, Thursday and Friday and Saturday in Atlanta, Sunday in Brunswick, Maine, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in upstate New York, Thursday morning in Pittsburgh, Thursday evening in Boston University, Friday morning in Worcester, Massachusetts, Friday evening in Lexington, Massachusetts. Nothing on Saturday, Atlanta on Sunday.
Cases where you're speaking for white candidates, why do you think they've asked you to speak for them? Why do they want to be associated with you and ask for your support?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they think I'll draw a big crowd or something. I don't know why they asked me, but what's interesting to me is why I agree to do it. Now, a guy like O'Dwyer, I've known him and seen him for a long time. You know, I used to come up to New York 2 or 3 years ago to speak at very small gatherings, liberal groups, without much constituency, and he would always be there. You turn around, there he was, with white hair. And, you know, he's just, I think, probably the most decent American politician on the scene today.
What is your interest in this campaign? Why would you, as a black brother, campaign for this white man?
Because
from Georgia, I mean, and you know
okay, I'll tell you what,
how it is.
We just ran a campaign in Georgia. A black guy running against Herman Talmadge. The election was last Wednesday, the primary, and he lost. See, so that means I'm stuck with Herman Talmadge and Richard Russell.
That means that
now
you're stuck?
I mean, those are my senators from Georgia. Now, when Mr. O'Dwyer gets in the Senate, I know he's going to represent you. I also think he's going to represent me. And I'd much rather have him representing me than the two guys I'm stuck with now.
So therefore you feel, well, why isn't there a black candidate, man, going for it?
That's, something for the people in New York.
Occasionally, these appearances on behalf of white candidates offend black people. But his white liberal support in the North is growing rapidly. Next stop, a Westchester County political rally.
In the state of Alabama, in the state of Tennessee, in the state of Carolinas, both states, in the state of Georgia and the state of Mississippi, wherever the struggle for human rights was most intense, there could be found a slight, young, cool, composed, articulate leader of young blacks and whites alike. The Honorable Julian Bond from Georgia.
That's very kind. This is the first speech that I have made since we ran Lester Maddox out of Chicago.
Place, Scarsdale, one of America's richest suburbs. This is Julian Bond's dilemma. He enjoys widespread support from Northern liberals because he has fought for civil rights and for de-escalation in Vietnam. But can he work for increasingly militant black goals and still continue to get the kind of white support he'll need to attain a position of national leadership? Certainly he has all the qualities of leadership. A young white politician with his qualifications would have a bright future. Is this true for a black man? To understand Bond's political philosophy, one must go to the source of his power, his constituency, Atlanta's 111th district.
It used to be that 3 men represented this whole county in the State House of Representatives, and now we've got 21 districts from which candidates run, and 3 are still elected countywide. So this district is about 93 or 94% black. It includes the schools of the Atlanta University Senate, 4 public housing projects. The labor force is predominantly female. Most of the women who work are domestic workers. The men are unskilled laborers with an occasional semi-skilled laborer. Unemployment among the male labor force is about 50%. Among the female section of the labor force is about 25%. This section here is what's called Vine City, and really very depressed area, a lot of unemployment, delinquency, a lot of alcoholism.
This is Julian Bond's Atlanta. As a representative in the State House, he is almost powerless to pass legislation for his black constituents. White representatives outnumber black by 20 to 1, but he has been able to use his influence to improve basic city services for them. He is so popular that he is running unopposed in the November election.
How can you direct your career so that you'll be in a position to really contribute meaningfully to these people's lives?
Well, a couple of ways. I can stay in the state legislature here for 20 years until I get to be chairman of some committee, in which case I will have some power. But even at that, the legislative process is so slow. I mean, even were the Georgia legislature a forward-looking progressive body, the process itself is so slow. It takes many, many years to effect meaningful change. That's number one. There's one thing I could do, though, is stay there for a long period of time and hope to rise to a position of power and eminence. The other thing I could do is seek another elective office, Congress, for instance, in which case my powers would be increased, but perhaps not insofar as they affect the immediate daily lives of the people whom I now represent. The third thing I think I might be able to do is get out of politics and then go into some other line of work where you help people immediately every single day of the year. I think for the present I want to stick with the job I have right now.
In Atlanta, years of segregation, ironically, have given blacks a certain measure of self-determination.
Segregation, in a very weird way, has been very good to black people in the South. It's caused us to become capitalists where we might not have done so, caused us to employ ourselves where we might not have done so, caused us to build up our own educational and religious institutions where we might not have done so. Segregation has done that for us. There are probably more black businesses in this city than there are in the city of New York, and all of Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant. Another thing different about the North and South, there are more black-run schools in the city of Atlanta than there are in the whole city of New York. I know you got more black school principals in this city than you have in all of New York State. More black school teachers proportionately here than you've got in New York City and New York State. But there's a further difference, North and South, and in my constituents, I think, are really integration-minded. They see progress for them as getting their kids into a white school rather than improving the quality of education at the local black school. The reason they see that, I think, is because the local black school is not only sub-quality or below par, but it's also so overcrowded that what they want is immediate relief. So here I'm an integrationist, and I also try to encourage them, however, that their integrationist tendencies could best be served, I think, by them adopting some separatist tendencies. That is, a tendency to unite among themselves, not just in my district, because it's almost an all-black district, but citywide, that black voters, for instance, have to be a united group, have to be separated from white people, have to dissolve a coalition that's existed here for 20 years between all the blacks and some of the whites. And that coalition has kept moderate city governments in office, but it hasn't really served our interest. It's helped us without really helping us, you know, and I think that coalition ought to be dissolved, and we ought to become a force of our own.
A force of our own. Bond expresses the black mood from a Southern point of view, but he faces a real problem. Can he be his own man? Can he continue to express the will of black America and still attract support from the wider white American community? If he can't, it will be one more important sign to black people that democracy in America does not work for them.
There are other indicators in the 1968 presidential campaign that suggest that the democratic system isn't in tune with the needs of the black community. This does give some support to the contention of Malcolm X that democracy in a racist society is fascism. Now, this issue this year tend more to polarize than unite the two communities. None of the candidates have gone after the black vote as rigorously as in the past. Instead, the campaign has been full of code words with strong racial overtones. Your home is your castle, busing, and the number one issue, law and order. Here with an analysis of the 68 campaign and the candidates is Dr. Charles Hamilton, chairman of the Department of Political Science at Roosevelt University in Chicago.
The 1968 election campaign in regard to black Americans reflects the outcome of a national politics which has been crisis reacting. It took the dramatic events of a Birmingham and a Selma March to create concern from 1963 to 1965. It took the explosions in the black communities after Watts to focus attention on the oppressive economic and political conditions in the North. And now, the major candidates appear to be courting the concerns of a vast, white, fearful America for law and order. What these candidates fail to understand is that black America, too, is concerned with law and order. But thus far, the major emphasis seems to be on order. If the country were really concerned with law, it would enforce the building codes against absentee slumlords. It would enforce the laws against exploitative merchants and against discriminatory real estate interests and employers, and so forth. Failure to do this leads many black Americans to believe that the political concerns are largely with order, that is, the status quo, and only concerned with that law which cools things and which does not rock the boat. The Republican candidate speaks essentially in terms of black capitalism, and many black Americans are fully aware that private industry probably does not have the willingness or the capacity to begin to solve most of the problems in the ghettos. And it is not nearly sufficient to think that we are approaching solutions by emphasizing simply the development of black entrepreneurs, as important as that may be. In addition, the Republican vice presidential nominee has clearly stated that he does not believe in local people controlling community programs. Such a position is hardly calculated to win the support of many black people who sincerely see the necessity of blacks to control the institutions of decision-making that affect their lives. These institutions are frequently in the hands of some whites who are unsympathetic to the interests of the black community. The Democratic nominee speaks in terms of community participation and of a domestic Marshall Plan, with the necessity for a massive injection of federal resources. This is crucial and important, but the incoming Congress will probably be quite conservative and less willing to respond to these programs. Therefore, for the success of a Democratic administration in relation to these problems, a sympathetic Congress is necessary. That hardly seems likely, and therefore, a general feeling of cynicism and despair has set in. Both parties are experiencing the result of lack of legitimacy, a credibility gap, and neither major candidate seems able to do anything which leads to closing that gap.
Since the Voting Rights Act of 1965, almost spectacular gains in voter registration have been made in the South. Today, a record 3,112,000 blacks, 62% are registered. The first significant gains since Reconstruction have been made in the 3 southern states. In Mississippi, the percentage of eligible blacks who registered has jumped from 6.7% in 1964 to 59.4%. In Alabama, the percentage has more than doubled from 23% in '64 to 56.7% today. And Louisiana had added 27% from 32 to 59.3%. Texas this year added 55,000 voters to bring its percentage from 57.7 to 83.1, 9 points higher than the 72.3% of white Texans registered. Another 1 million blacks were registered in states outside of the South. Only about 35% of the blacks are registered in the black communities of the North. And during the heyday of the Reconstruction period, blacks joined the Republican Party, and the South had a 2-party system. They continued to vote Republican until Franklin Delano Roosevelt's kitchen cabinet focused the New Deal's attention on their basic needs. There were defections to the Democrats in 1936 and 1940, but in 1944 the black vote became a balance of power. In 10 states, it exceeded the number required to shift the state away from Thomas E. Dewey to the Roosevelt column. The black vote decided the Kennedy-Nixon election in 1960. In an election where the white vote was evenly divided, the large city Democratic black vote made the difference. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson's landslide left Republican Barry Goldwater with 4% of the black vote. Of the 6 southern states, President Johnson carried 4. Arkansas, Florida, Tennessee, and Virginia would have gone to Goldwater without the black vote. In 1968, there is a 3rd party candidate and 3 black 4th party peace candidates, Dick Gregory, Eldridge Cleaver, and the Communist Party candidate Charlene Mitchell are on the ballot in several states. The Black Power Conference last month recommended that the black community either vote for a black candidate or register its protest by not voting at all. Interestingly, however, current polls indicate that between 80 and 90% of the black vote this year will go to Hubert Humphrey. Last week, the All-Black National Committee of Inquiry, a group of 100 prominent blacks organized last April to evaluate the candidates, voted not to endorse Vice President Humphrey. Congressman John Conyers of Detroit explains their decision.
The National Committee of Inquiry refuses to recommend that votes be cast for candidates who are not willing to respect it by speaking directly to the concerns of black people in a manner that will ensure them their rightful place as full participants in American society. I don't preclude the possibility that the Vice President could make a dramatic change in the direction that has been suggested by this National Committee of Inquiry. Nowhere in this statement and nowhere in our deliberations was there any intention to keep black voters away from the polls. I want to lay that to rest once and for all.
Will the black vote be a balance of power this year, Dr. Hamilton?
It's quite clear that the black vote could operate as a balance of power if it were to turn out on Election Day. In the major northern industrial states such as New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and California, the vote will be split between Nixon and Wallace. The Democratic vote, a combination of traditional hardcore whites and blacks, could muster a plurality to take the state. This is, of course, conjecture. It's quite questionable whether the Democratic candidate will come out of the inner city with sufficient majorities to offset the clear Nixon and Wallace votes coming from the outer city and the suburbs and downstate. Voter turnout is the only procedure that could make this possible. A boycott of the election by black voters, who would normally vote in this instance for Humphrey, would certainly guarantee a Nixon victory, or possibly, with a large Wallace vote, deny the necessary 270 electoral votes to any candidate. This is especially possible if Wallace carries, as now expected, several southern states. Again, if Nixon and Wallace engage in a close fight in the South, the black vote in some southern and border states could be important. A large number of black candidates are seeking public office in various local election contests. Louis Martin put the figure at close to 200. It's clear, however, that an overall boycott of the election for purposes of punishing the top of the ticket will seriously affect the efforts of these black candidates. A balance of power strategy can only work if the opposition splits its vote. Thus, if Nixon and Wallace fight it out, with the assumption being that most black people who voted would vote for Humphrey, there is the outside possibility that a heavy black turnout could conceivably influence the Electoral College results.
Here to discuss black politics with me on Black Journal is Dr. Hamilton from Chicago and Mr. W.C. Patton, the Associate Director of Voter Education for the NAACP. How about the South itself, though? How do you think they will go as far as a black vote, because you've had a large increase of voter registration there?
Well, I think the South, as far as Negroes are concerned, generally vote Democratic, and I think they're going to do so in this election.
Well, now, you mentioned a blackout of the vote, and I heard Professor Hamilton mention the same thing, and I think I get back to you, Dr. Hamilton. You mentioned this blackout of vote, too. What happens if black out the vote, or if they do vote? Will there be any gains either way?
Well, I think that it's very clear that on the local level, where you have, especially where you have black candidates running, it's very crucial, as far as I'm concerned, that black people vote. Now, it's very difficult to get this notion across to a number of people that probably the only way you're going to be able to affect electoral politics is by turning out. There is some notion that one can punish the party by failing to vote for it, but this is a very risky business when you're talking about electoral politics.
Well, my point was, though, that if the black vote turns out and they, in some instances, become the balance of power, or if they didn't vote, the person going into office, will that black voting constituency get any more out of the office if they had voted, or get any less if they don't vote?
My judgment, they'll get less, because the guy who gets in will owe them nothing.
Well, you made another interesting comment, too, earlier, and that was about the Republican candidate and his wanting to do away with local control. But I also look at him as sort of a states' writer. How do you make that comparison there with his ideology there?
Well, I'm going to, yeah, I would let that candidate live with his inconsistency. I don't have any intention of trying to reconcile that. I know what he means, though. I suspect he means very clearly that he's concerned with not so much federal or local, but rather concerned with having power remain in particular kinds of hands. You see, when we talk today about community control, especially in the North, we have very clearly in mind the great need for black people to control their communities, you see. And if you see a candidate talking against that, he is essentially saying that he's not interested in having those federal resources come into the hands of local black people.
Well, now, if you're talking about these blocks, like you mentioned just now, the black community wanting to get their control, now, Mr. Patton, in the South, they've had a higher voter registration. And in the North, the registration for voters is lowest. Now, how do you see this incompatibility or this comparison? Because
well, many of the Negroes who are living in the North now migrated from the South, and they found conditions so different there until they have not concerned themselves to go vote. And it's not a matter of apathy, it's a matter of being able to relate the ballot with their bacon and egg, with their everyday living.
Well, we just got to mentioning if we turn out the vote in a black community, where, say, as in South Chicago, West Side, and Harlem, Watts, and these other places, wouldn't they have a semblance of a chance to getting that power control?
Surely. Anytime a A solidified Negro vote is a part of the election. It tends to give them far more power because every candidate is concerned about getting those votes that are out there.
Let me mention one thing, Lou. Mr. Patton mentioned voter education also, and I think that this is going to be a crucial factor, if not now, certainly in the long term. There has to be considerable emphasis put on voter education. It's not simply enough, as I'm sure Mr. Patton would agree, to get registered and even get out that vote on election day, but that vote has to begin to vote its interests.
Certainly. I'd like to point out also that while there are a few people who are saying, let's sit out this election, let's not go to the polls, that we don't have anything to vote for, there's one thing sure, that I have news for those folks, that they may consider it nothing to vote for, but there's one thing, they have a hell of a heap to vote against.
Let's suppose that Wallace gets elected. How do you think this will affect the war in Vietnam and also the black man who is going to go into the army to be fighting in Vietnam?
I think the election of Wallace in this country would we're already in a revolution. The degree of a revolution, I will not say at this time, but I think if Wallace was in the White House, we'd have certainly a bloody revolution in this country, something similar to what you've never seen. Black people are not going to take what he's putting out, this thing of law and order, because when he talks about law and order, he's talking about Negroes. He's not talking about law, he's not talking about order. He's talking about Negroes.
So this will also affect the black man going to the service, too, I presume.
Surely.
I think that we'd better make it very clear, if it hasn't been made clear for your public already, that the war in Vietnam, no matter how it's viewed, and in fact, no matter who is elected, is a liability. That we must stop this nonsense of guns and butter and having both. We've got to start talking in terms of getting out of that despicable, immoral, imprudent war. And until we do, I'm going to suggest in no uncertain terms that there shall be no peace in this country. You see, Americans must come to terms with that if they haven't already. I suspect a large portion have, you see. And I think that the election of a Wallace, to follow your question, would sow the seeds of further frustration and explosions in this country on the part of blacks and whites.
Gentlemen, we have to bring it to a close. We've been talking with W.C. Patton, the Associate Director of Voter Education for the NAACP, and Dr. Charles Hamilton, Professor of Political Science at Roosevelt University in Chicago. I want to thank you both.
Africa, country of the black man's past. For several centuries, the image of Africa has suffered as a result of misconceptions created by European exploitation. There have been frightening myths of the primitive, savage African, the dark, forbidding continent. Historical research is now revealing the civilizations which flourished long before Europeans arrived on its shores. Evidence points to an ancient Africa of majestic kingdoms, the kingdoms of Mali, Ghana, Ashanti, Dahomey, Nok, Benin, the Yoruba states, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and the Monomotapa. These kingdoms generated creative achievements that only now Western man is beginning to grasp. African art, highly philosophical and abstract, represents through visual symbols the values and beliefs of the people. African sculpture is characterized by its dynamism and vitality. Hard, powerful lines and bold surfaces, conveying motion or tension, communicating happiness or sadness. These images reflect a tradition and provide a sense of continuity for all black men, from their past through the present and future. Nigeria. Congo. Ghana. Ivory Coast. At the African Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., Olujimi Daniel, a Nigerian lecturer, discusses African sculpture.
The African artist or the African carver does not try to reproduce nature. He does not want to reproduce nature because it is there. What he wants to show in his art and in his carving is to show you what is important. And therefore, when he carves, he tries to emphasize what is most important to him. Take the Ashanti doll, for example, which has a very large head compared with the rest of the body. The head is believed to be to be where the soul is, and therefore that makes the head more important than the rest of the body. Here we have the Ibeji figures. Ibeji is a Yoruba word meaning twins. If you have a set of twins and one of them dies, you more or less give this figure here the same treatment that you have given the living twin. Traditional art deals exclusively with the people, with the religion of the people. It is not something that you just carve because you feel like carving and therefore you want to sell to some tourists. It is something that you carve for a religious ceremony, maybe for a naming ceremony, or for a crowning ceremony, special ceremonies. Now, this is traditional art. The Nok culture, which existed in northern Nigeria.
Until recently, the Nok culture was a lost civilization, 3,000 years old. Here, centuries before Christ, Africa, south of the Sahara, emerged into an era of metals, the Iron Age. Nok terracottas are the oldest known of the West African sculptures. The creative works of Ife, the Greece of ancient Africa, and the Benin Kingdom are now considered among the great masterpieces of the world. The first astonishing heads and busts brought to Europe were greeted with disbelief. Steeped in their misconceptions of Africa, the Europeans could not believe that black Africans 2,000 years ago had created such works of art. The walls of the palace of the Benin king, the Oba, were decorated with bronze bas-reliefs. The Oba wears the choker, or necklace, a symbol of royalty. Despite the artistic achievements of these ancient and medieval African kingdoms, even today their works and societies are still called primitive.
The term primitive art is a European word, it's an English word. There is no African word for that particular art. Their art to them is a religious thing. Therefore, the term is very, very misleading. It gives the impression that this is something that has been created by people who have no civilization and probably a very low level of intelligence. And this we know it isn't true, as we have seen from this Nok culture, for example. Long before Columbus came to America, there were cities in Africa.
From the Congo, a mother-child figure. The Bakongo power figure. The Yoruba of Nigeria developed a style of enclosed and free space. Squat, heavy proportions, making use of vivid colors. The Sagani Kun mask from the Ivory Coast and Mali. Small brass Ashanti sculptures used in weighing gold dust. Animal and human figures convey the religion and folklore of the people. The Gabon Fang figures are known for their contained force and symmetry. Among the most abstract of African sculptures are the metal-covered Bakota figures, a mask from the Bobo people of Upper Volta. At the turn of the century, modern European artists discovered and acknowledged the universal significance of these products of African culture. They encountered in African sculpture a freedom from conventional form, a dynamic quality and power which unlocked their own imaginations. And thus, African art has become a dominant influence in the art of the 20th century. A doggone figure from Mali. Picasso's Woman with Towel. A Baole mask. A Modigliani painting. An Ashanti fertility doll. Clay's Senecchio. A Congo mask. Jawlinski's mask. A mask from the Congo. A German expressionist's lithograph.
We have a fundamental difference. Whereas here in Western art, the thing is, oh, this is a Picasso, for example, and so that's beautiful. It isn't functional. Whereas in African art, everything that he's done that is carved in traditional art is functional. It is for a definite purpose. Well, in fact, it isn't even thought of as art, really. It's part and parcel of their way of life.
Recent discoveries of ancient African kingdoms, their cultures and their art, are exploding more familiar Western stereotypes of the savage African.
And now part 2 of People and Events in the News.
Floyd B. McKissick, former National Director of CORE, announced the formation of Floyd B. McKissick Enterprises. He will be devoting his time to working as a consultant to black businesses and hopes to bring black businessmen together to exchange information and ideas pertinent to black economic growth. On our last program, we reported that newly appointed Brigadier General Frederick Davidson said the Army has made unbelievable progress toward eliminating segregation. Now from Saigon comes word that Major Lavelle Merritt of Chicago issued an 8-page statement expressing disenchantment with the Army, saying the black military officer group is the largest collection of identifiable accommodationists, a code phrase for Uncle Toms. After 20 years, Major Lavelle Merritt said he was fed up and wants out. The Association for the Study of Negro Life and History held its 53rd annual conference on the black experience in America and other parts of the world. Most impressive was the particularly large number of young scholars and intellectuals present. The young people who attended expressed dissatisfaction with the conference. They felt that the organization, the oldest of its kind in the United States, was showing signs of age. They objected to the use of the word Negro in many of the papers and indeed in the title of the organization itself. A caucus led by young Chester Higgins searched for ways in which the organization could be put in step with the mood of Afro-Americans. As one young scholar put it, we would have liked to have heard more papers from such dedicated historians as Dr. Joseph Harris, Richard B. Moore, Dr. Vincent Harding, and John Clark. Some of the older people were equally annoyed when they found that the wealth of material on African history unearthed by the late Professor William Leo Hansberry had not found its way into the conference. The late Dr. Ernest Albert Houghton, head of the anthropology department of Harvard University, said on turning down Professor Hansberry's application for a doctorate, and I quote, "Mr. Hansberry has made himself certainly the most competent authority on this subject. No present-day scholar has developed anything like the knowledge that Hansberry has on the subject. He has been unable to take the doctorate's degree in his chosen subject here at Harvard or anywhere else because of a lack of proper persons to supervise his thesis, and because there is nobody at the university, and there is no university or institution, so far as I know, that has manifested a really profound interest in the subject." John Clark observed that the American educational system is so backward that not only was William Leo Hansberry unable to receive a doctorate in African history from Harvard, but many black scholars for years were obliged to labor on African and Afro-American history outside the education establishment. Many of these men know far more about African and Afro-American history than most officially trained historians in the United States. The Amsterdam News carried bold headlines of the Earl Curtis Deloche case, as it is called by the FBI. Deloach's tortured body was found hanging by the heels in a schoolyard in Chickasaw Terrace, Alabama. Black people had hoped that the barbaric lynching of blacks in America was something of the past. Unfortunately, it is not. Deloach's murder was one of the 3 lynchings reported in recent weeks. And now, Lou House.
At the United Nations Church Center in New York, the Mozambique Liberation Front, Frelimo, celebrated its 4th year in its struggle for independence from Portugal.
We prefer to die by shot or by bombs or by whatever those bosses could bring. It is preferable to die at once than to die slowly and smoothly, working in the plantations, in the mines for the profit of foreigners. This great historic day for the Mozambican people that has already cost some precious lives of good sons of Africa. In homage of those brave and heroic sons of Africa, I would like very much to request you if we could stand for 1 minute in their memory.
During the ceremony, the Frelimo representative, Sharfuddin Khan, explained the driving force behind the movement and paid respects to those who lost their lives for it. Mozambique lies on the east coast of Africa, covering over 300,000 square miles with a population of more than 7 million. For many years it has been a Portuguese colony, and in 1962, Frelimo was formed from a combination of 3 nationalist groups to fight for liberation. Incidentally, several black U.S. groups, including the NAACP, sent the Frelimo gathering a telegram of support and pledges of financial aid. These photographs, special to Black Journal, show guerrilla warfare activities that began in 1964. Frelimo's president, Dr. Eduardo Mondlane, says that he will settle for nothing less than total independence. And that's Black Journal for tonight, brothers and sisters. Black Journal number 5. Here's a program note to remember. Black Journal will be seen on Mondays instead of Wednesdays, and that starts on Monday, November the 25th. Alaikum assalam. Wan Gay Sigay.
This is NET, the Public Television Network.